Now, this one tutorial we're going to involve now with pediatric fracture. Now, pediatric fractures are fractures involving the pediatric immature bone, and the pediatric immature bones are those bones that the fascial plates are not yet closed. In the pediatric fractures, example of pediatric fracture that you have the torus fracture or the buccal fracture. Is it clear? The torus fracture or the buccal fracture. Now, this is how the torus fracture resembles. It means that you have a patient, this is the bone, you have a bone here like that, and then it starts it starts getting big at one point like that. Is it clear? It's a result of a compression. If it gets big at one side like that, that is called a buccal or the torus fracture. Is it clear? That's one. Now, the second point, we are going to have a plastic deformity. Plastic deformity is not actually a fracture. Is it clear? It is just a deformity since the bones of the pediatric patient are highly mobile. So if normally the bone has to be like that straight, is it clear? But in this case, the bone is now bent, is it clear, in one direction. That's called a plastic deformity. Is it clear? Now, the third element after plastic deformity, we have now a green stick fracture. Green stick fracture. Now, green stick fracture is after a plastic deformity. So you have a bone. Is it clear? You have a bone. You see, like a green stick. Is it clear? Just like a green stick. When you try to cut a stick that is fresh, a green stick that is fresh. Is it clear? You are going to have this. You press. You see that it's going to deform, and then at a certain point in time, that other side which has deformed, it starts as a plastic deformity, and later on, after the plastic deformity, this part which is deformed now breaks behind here. Is it clear? It breaks behind here, having a fracture. Is it clear? It breaks behind here, having a fracture. That's a green stick fracture. Are you understanding? So it's a plastic deformity plus a fracture on the posterior side which is bended, or the side of the convexity, the inner convexity. Now, the next thing after that, we are going to speak about the hairline fracture. Hairline fracture. Is it clear? Now, hairline fracture is a very small fracture. Is it clear? Hairline fracture is a very small fracture. You cannot easily distinguish it on a bone. Is it clear? It just presents like a hairline, very minute hairline fracture. Is it clear? It's not easily seen on a bone. Is it clear? That is a hairline fracture. Now, the fifth fracture type that we have are the growth plate fractures. The growth plate fracture, and the growth plate fracture involve the epiphysis, metaphysis, and the physis. Is it clear? Now you need to know that what the growth plate you have when you have, let's say you have a bone here like that. At this level, you have a growth plate. Above, the growth plate is made up of three parts. We have the first part which is above, which is the epiphysis. Is it clear? Above there, you have the epiphysis. Now in the middle, which is darker. Is it clear? When you are going, is the darker is said to be lucency on X-ray. In the middle, which is darker, is the physis, and below, which is whiter, is the metaphysis, and then later on you are going to have your diaphysis down here. That is how the growth plate. All this is called your growth plate. Is it clear? The growth plate in pediatric patient. Is it clear? So the growth plate is made up of the epiphysis, the physis, and the metaphysis. Is it clear? Those are the three major elements. The one that every time that the physis involved, it is always in pairing growth, because that's where multiple dividing cells are located. Is it clear? Now you need to know that what the classification of growth plate fracture or fascial fracture is the same as fascial fracture. Classification of growth plate fracture, we use the Salter-Harris classification. Is it clear? So it can just be said to be the best classification in pediatric patient. Is it clear? When we are talking about pediatric patient, this is a major classification we speak about. Is a classification for growth plate fracture, which is the Salter-Harris classification. Now, Salter-Harris classification, you have class 1. Class 1 is when you have a fracture. If you have a class 1 Salter-Harris classification, class 1 is when you have a fracture of only the physis. Is it clear? If you have fracture of only the physis, is class 1. So it's generally as such. Though in order to come this class 1 to class 5, it is classified from class 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Is it clear? The simple way how I cram it and my classmates is that we consider a family. What is the origin of a family? Origin of a family. Is it clear? The origin of a family starts with a father or papa. Is it clear? Papa is in French. A father, papa. So feces is first the papa. Is it clear? Then after you have papa, mama. Those are the two people, papa plus mama. That's the feces and the metaphysis. After papa, mama, the third now is papa et les enfants. Papa plus the children, enfants. Is it clear? Now, in the fourth one is papa plus mama plus enfant. All of the family. And then in the fifth one is when you have a reduction in the growth plate size. Reduction in growth plate size. So feces is the class 1 is only the feces involvement. Class 2 is feces plus metaphysis involvement. Class 3 is feces plus epiphysis involvement in the fracture. Class 4 is feces plus metaphysis plus epiphysis involvement in the fracture. And then class 5 is when they have a reduction in the growth plate size. So what do I mean? If you have a fracture only like this, it is class 1. Is it clear? Now, if you have a fracture going up like this, it is class 2 involving it's class 3, sorry, involving the epiphysis. But if you have a fracture from the facial background going down to the metaphysis, class 3 is class 2. Is it clear? Physis and metaphysis. Now, if you have a fracture involving the physis, the epiphysis, and the metaphysis, class 4. And if you have a fracture now involving a reduction in the size of the facial plate, is class 5. Is it clear? So every time that you have a class 5, it is a need for a surgery. Why? Because you are going to that one causes a reduction in growth plate, and when there is reduction in growth plate, there is a problem with the limb growth that is affected. So that limb, there is going to be an asymmetry in limb length because one limb is going to grow faster and more than the other. So that is involved in the classification of fractures. After the classification of fractures, the next thing you're going to see now is going to be the mechanism of fractures.